What allowed for democratic growth in the early 19th century? Historians often call this first half of the 19th century, or the 1800s, as the triumph of democracy. And they call it that because states are doing something to amend their constitutions, their state constitutions, to eliminate property qualifications. Meaning, no longer do you have to be a property holding man in order to be eligible to vote. This is a huge change. This is why we see an expansion of democratic participation and an expansion of political interest by most Americans in the 19th century, because more and more people are eligible to vote and therefore interested in politics and participating. So there's a huge host of ramifications that come from states eliminating this property holding qualification from their state constitutions. Now, this all comes about because of something that is going on in Rhode Island called the Dorr War. And at the end of the day, what you need to know about the Dorr War is that Rhode Island is a very small state. Not a lot of people were able to be property owners, but there were a lot of influential, wealthy white men who were being excluded from democratic participation in Rhode Island and fought back. And so we see the state actually changing and eliminating the property qualification for native-born men, meaning men that were born in the United States, black as well as white men, although it retained an exemption for immigrants until the later 1880s. So because of this, a lot of states also follow suit. The exception would be Virginia. Most states eliminate the property holding qualification, which means that by 1840, 90% of adult white men were eligible to vote. This means, again, they're going to be more interested in politics. They're going to be more informed, wanting to be more informed about what's going on in the nation. This is also coinciding with the information revolution, what we think of as an expansion in the public sphere, an expansion or exposition in the printing press. So not only are people now eligible to vote, but they're also being exposed to more political literature, as well as other literature as well. The penny press allows for materials to be printed very cheaply and consumed readily. You see the start of political party newspapers that would be 100% biased, trying to influence their political agenda, and alternative press newspapers as well. Around this time, we're going to see the start of the Liberator, which will be an abolitionist, anti-slavery newspaper that helps to draw support for the anti-slavery cause. We also see a new generation of women writers who are going to find fame and also a larger audience with women readers now that more and more women are being educated and are literate as a result of Republican motherhood after the Revolutionary War. So all of this, the information revolution, the changes that are being made to the state constitutions, really come together for this kind of perfect storm, so to speak, or perfect alignment to get Andrew Jackson elected, which you'll be reading about later on in the chapter. Because politicians are really having to change sort of their strategies of how they're going to be appealing to voters. One of the things that Andrew Jackson really appealed to was that he was just a common man, and he was just like the voters who he was wanting to have cast their ballot for him. So a very big shift. The limits of democracy at this time were that women were still not allowed to have property in a lot of states. Blacks were still barred from full democracy, even though they were allowed to hold property, for example, in Rhode Island. This was not something that was consistent amongst state constitutions. And oftentimes there would be limitations, especially in the South, as you'll be reading about in Chapter 11, for free Black men. So women, Blacks, they are being barred from full democracy. And we still see, in the example here, we see the caricature of Dandy Jim, these negative portrayals of African Americans really perpetuating society, even in the North as well as the South in the 19th century. No state in the Union at this time offered free Blacks full equality before the law. And we see this especially when it comes to the justice system, the judicial system. Black men were not allowed to serve on a jury, which often skewed, as you can imagine, the outcome of jury trials. So because more and more, working class men, lower class men, white men are able to vote, we see that race comes to replace class. Right now that poor white men have the same political clout, so to speak, as, wealthy, property-holding, educated white men, right? They're equal. They both are able to cast a ballot. We see that race becomes sort of the new substitute for class, right? Even though democracy is equalizing in some ways the rights of white men, race inhibits that equality from expanding to, as I said, African Americans or women.